So I go in and shoot this woman in the head, and people are screaming and running all over, and there's blood everywhere.
We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately.
Violence in video games is a consistently controversial issue, used as an excuse for real-life mass shootings in the US by politicians and lawyers since the medium began to take off in the 80s and 90s. It isn't going anywhere, as indicated by Trump's use of this cliché in August 2019, following mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio.
Video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
Whilst the idea that violent video games cause violence is untrue, with countless studies over the years demonstrating it as such, it is equally incorrect to say that the depiction of violence in video games has no impact on society. This latter position obscures a very clear reality. Video games serve as war propaganda.
We're moving into the hills. Bad position, whoever parked the vehicles in the shed, parked them behind the shed.
This is the result of a combination of factors. As we have discussed, the prevalence of violence in video games is in part a special feature of the medium itself, with movement operating as the most direct manner in which to evoke the feeling of total flow required by the medium. It stands to reason that it would be so. Obstacles and enemies are the simplest way to make movement engaging, and thus violence appears across a huge spectrum of genres. With this said, it is not the case that matters could not be different. The development of video games in this direction, even if it is suggested by the medium, is not fated. Rather, it has been cultivated, beginning with the first video game to ever introduce violent mechanics, Space War, produced by MIT researchers in 1962. The role that the US state has played in shaping the medium's development is undoubtedly enormous.
What's up today?
Despite this, the relationship between the state and the video game industry is very secretive and largely unknown. There are, however, clear links to the proliferation of war games, with them even playing a practical role in the army itself as combat simulations for training. With the explosion of the consumer market in the 80s and 90s, this saw commercial games take a key role in such simulation. A clear example of this can be seen in the case of the 1995 Marine Doom Combat Simulator mod for Doom 2, or 2004's Full Spectrum Warrior, a combat simulator developed commercially. In terms of propaganda, the Call of Duty franchise serves as a clear example, being developed in consultation with the US Army veterans and staff since its first release. This has played a number of ideological roles. For example, this year's Call of Duty release is set in an incredibly loosely veiled version of the Syrian war, clearly making the case for US involvement and portraying Russia as invaders. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare is intended to prepare audiences for future war. Beyond this series, other examples of propaganda useful to the US Army abound. Even where direct cooperation with the Army does not occur, propaganda continues. For example, shooter games license the design of real gun models from weapon manufacturers, bolstering their profits and doubling as adverts. The ubiquity of violence in video games is thus the result of both the medium's somewhat inherent properties and its development in cooperation with the US military. Its use as propaganda is contained in both the intended meaning of many games, their portrayal of war tending to display the US as a force for good, and in their transformation of combat into something aesthetically enjoyable or fun. The impact that this propaganda has is heightened by the nature of play, which necessitates adopting and internalizing a role. The power of this is evident with, for example, video games increasingly driving army recruitment. Beyond recruitment, this ubiquity has produced violent, almost fascistic backlashes against games which depart from violent models, as in the case of the so-called Gamergate movement, and plays a considerable role in the justification of imperialist war. This is not simply a moral point, but a fact.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
Good job, team. Get ready for the next round.